and evolution as it's taught is just totally false, been proven false. But regardless, even if Kent Hovind was wrong, he has a First Amendment and a right to be a Christian that teaches his faith. Just like Muslims have a right to, their faith. But there's a war on Christians. But let's get into his case for folks that don't know about it right now. Mark Adams.
Well, Alex, it was in 2006 when a jackbooted commie Nazi government Gestapo goon squad arrested Pastor Kent Hovind and his wife Jo at gunpoint inside their home in the dark of night. And then later on that year, Pastor Hovind was convicted on a 58-count indictment. Now, 45 of those counts had to do with so-called structuring. That is, Dr. Hovind was withdrawing money from his bank account in order to fund the needs of his ministry. And for these withdrawals, they were typically more than $5,000, but less than $10,000. And because he was doing that, the government was pursuing him as if he was part of a drug cartel or a terrorist organization.
A guy with no criminal record, a school teacher who had a successful ministry in a theme park, and we just put on screen the New York Times. Let's put it on screen. The headline, law lets IRS seize accounts on suspicion, no crime reported. It talks about old ladies with tiny businesses. I mean, I pull out cash all the time to give bonuses to people at Christmas and stuff. I mean, I give $300 to employees. It's like $10,000, $15,000 to get all that out. That's not structuring. That's after-tax money. But this is how they use the, quote, rules, not the law, in a reign of terror. Go ahead.
Exactly. The IRS has a reputation of ruthlessly using these so-called structuring laws to terrorize innocent citizens. There was hearings about this last month, and the upshot of it is that the IRS would try to curtail.
They said, we're going to stop doing it and cut it back, and we're sorry for 34,000 innocent people having their lives ruined, or people we threw in prison for no reason, and all our fake juries and the rest of it, because they even go further. But it's just like the ATF last week saying, well, we won't ban your bullets. They're back this week. And this is a criminal operation.
Indeed. And in fact, if you look into the court case itself, it gets even worse. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld his conviction on all of the 45 so-called structuring charges. But in 2013, the 11th Circuit overturned a guilty verdict on a separate case. This was U.S. versus Lang, a separate case of structuring. They overturned the verdict because of the way the federal prosecutors mishandled the case.
And there were clearly orders to go and get him because he was articulate, good-looking, reaching over 1 billion people with his ministry. He was incredibly successful, and so that's why they came after him.
Indeed. And now, and like I said, the bulk of the charges are these so-called structuring charges. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the conviction, but then a little more than a year later, when the same kind of case came before them, they overturned the conviction on this guy, Mr. Lang, because of the way the federal prosecutors mishandled his case. But the procedures that the prosecutors used on Mr. Lang were exactly the same procedures that they used on Kevin Hovind, but yet they will not apply that ruling retroactively to Pastor Kant's case. So, in other words, they overturned the structuring charges against Lang, but even though the same kind of prosecutor misconduct was being applied in Pastor Kent Hovind's case, they will not use that precedent to overturn his verdict.
Unbelievable.
That was in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and that was in 2013.
And we're going to skip this network break because this is so important. If they can get him, they can get anybody. And instead of cowering in fear, this agency needs to be abolished. We need to go back to the taxing system we had previous to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and the subsequent income tax. It is such a scam, but he still languishes in prison, even though the New York Times admits this is a criminal fraud, their interpretation of the law used to persecute innocent people and anyone, including folks that pull cash out of ATMs. You know, deposit your money, pull cash out, you are a criminal. No, using cash is not illegal. Using cash is not a crime. I've been doing it for a long time. I also use credit cards and stuff, but if it's private stuff I'm doing and not a company function, then I pay for a lot of stuff in cash. And I give tips in cash. And people I'm trying to keep cash alive. Everybody knows that. That's not a crime. Well, under their system, they could doll up and dummy up this stuff on me. Well, go ahead and try it, crooks. Because we're sick of you, and we're sick of your criminal activity, and we're sick of the fact that all these Democrats and some Republicans and Al Sharpton, Al Sharpton owns $5 million of taxes and doesn't have to pay them. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting how they selectively use the IRS to persecute people and to shut down this person's ministry. It is just amazing. Obviously, the orders came down to persecute him. This happened under Bush, but it continues under Obama, and now it's expanded. Continue, Mark Adams, breaking down the case and how he's doing in prison.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned Al Sharpton. He owes over $1 million in taxes.
And the numbers I've seen are between 4 and 6.
Yes. And then let's not forget Charlie Rangel, Congressman Charlie Rangel. He has a whole pattern of tax evasion, special treatment and enrichment that seems to increase with his power and prestige in Congress. There was an article exposing him on the New York Post a few years ago. Then let's not forget former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. Big headlines in Forbes magazine. Geithner's tax troubles are serious, yet he goes on to become the Secretary of the Treasury.
I just want to throw up.
Another disturbing aspect. During the trial, I'm referring to his first trial, Kent Hovind explained how an IRS agent, Scott Schneider, he was a witness for the government, he sat at the prosecutor's table for the duration of the trial, even though he was a government witness. Witnesses are not supposed to be in the courtroom. And during that interview, Pastor Hovind explained he was concerned how the presence of an IRS agent, might intimidate the jury. Well, this reminded me.
And let's go forward. We're putting the document on screen. They had FBI agents on the jury.
Now, this is
on the grand jury.
Case. This is a separate case, Alex. This is from 1981.
No, I'm talking about that case, yeah.
Yes, but what you see here is U.S. Attorney Harold Edwards is writing a letter to the IRS District Director, Woodrow Malone, and you see right on page 2, Edwards is stating how agents of the FBI will be seated on the grand jury. So this gives you some insight as to the lengths that our government will go through to persecute a targeted victim.
That's right. They target who they want, then they put government agents in these federal juries, grand juries, and then juries as well. That's why they have a 96 to 97% federal conviction rate, because it's totally fake.
Well, no, indeed. And in fact, one of the government misconduct in federal judiciary that was discovered by Congressman George Hansen, he disclosed how U.S. attorneys were obtaining confidential tax records on jurors without that person's knowledge or consent. So that's been going on for a long time.
Well, let's not forget what I told folks a decade ago that was declassified last year. For decades, they've used the NSA, the DEA has, to create fake cases with fake spy data without warrants, and they create fake cases for the court, do mock trials and even fake evidence, and then the judges even know, and they go in and stage the whole thing.
The Edgar Steele case is very typical of that.
Of course, loving government, run by the actual drug dealers.
Indeed. Also, there's another one. Dr. French Anderson is sitting in prison right now. He has evidence, and this is not the federal government, this is the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department that framed him. He now has evidence that the recordings they used in court were totally fabricated, yet he could not get the courts to overturn his case.
Well, all I know is Kent Hovind was incredibly successful, and they got him on wire fraud, and they always seem to use that. Or the FBI comes to visit you and then asks you a bunch of questions, then you get something a little bit wrong. They claim lying to a federal agent. The answer is never talk to them. Talk to the hand. That is the answer. Do not talk to them one bit. And then the only way they've defeated EPA and FDA lawyers harassing companies is you then have to start investigating and doing lawsuits against the judges themselves and start doing corruption investigations on the judges. And it's the only way they back off. I mean, the government, and I've talked to top national lawyers on air. I've talked to the top lawyer who sues the FDA, always trying to ban vitamins. And the only way to shut them down is you start basically investigating the judge. It's the only thing these mobsters understand. And, boy, when you start investigating them, it is incredible. I got to say, state judges aren't that corrupt on average compared to the feds. And I'm not defending the states either. They have their own problems. But people who look to the feds to come in and fix things, that's like asking Satan to come in and, you know, make Slimer behave or something. You know, a little lower demon it's kind of mindless running around, you know, engaged in mischief compared to the mastermind Satan himself. What else we need to know, Mark Adams, about the Kent Hovind case?
Yes, we have some information about the judge, U.S. District Judge Margaret Rogers. I'm going back now to the first trial when he was sentenced by her, and she said to him that his crimes were worse than that of a rapist. Now, during a telephone interview from Kent Hovind, he named Baptist minister Dr. Greg Dixon as one of the witnesses who heard Judge Rogers make that outrageous remark. And I spoke with Dr. Dixon, and he affirmed me, yes, he heard the judge say that. He also executed a signed affidavit stating that. Several other people also submitted sworn affidavits. The reason why they took that course of action is when Kent Hovind finally got the court transcripts, those words did not appear in the official transcripts. Yet even though they have witnesses who have submitted affidavits, no investigation was launched as to why those words are missing of official court transcripts.
Please continue breaking it down.
Okay, now, again, Judge Rogers. In 2009, Judge Rogers cited 2 school teachers for contempt for silently praying before lunch.
Oh.
Afterwards, 50 congressmen issued a letter supporting the teachers. One of them, Representative Jeff Miller, said, a federal judge has gone well outside the bounds of the Constitution to declare that prayer offered among adults is illegal. And that is from the Washington Times.
That's right. We've got it on screen. That was just recently. And for those that don't understand this, in Texas there was a case. There's been a bunch of these just last year where a little, I think it was an 8-year-old girl, brought her little picture Bible, Sunday school Bible, in her bag, and they took it away from her and tried to suspend her. as if you couldn't have a Bible in the school. She could have whatever book she wanted. You could have a Harry Potter book, but not the Bible. It is a war on Christians. Are we going to put up with it? Yeah, most churches are scared to death getting in line. That's what this intimidation was about, and that will let the evil take over. You got to stand up to it and say no, and that's starting to happen.
We're on the march.